Mark chapter 5, starting with verse 1, it says, "Then he went across the lake to the region of the Gerasenes." Now, I want to say that this starts at the end of the story of him calming the seas. On his trip over here to the Gerasenes, the storm whipped up and he got up, said, "Peace be still," and he's Lord of the wind, the waves, and the seas. And so they pull in here to port at the Gerasenes. The Gerasenes is a place in Israel on the Sea of Galilee. But at this point, in this time, it was mostly inhabited by Gentiles. So even though this is a region inside of Israel, it was still inhabited mostly by Gentiles. And these Gentiles were raising pigs to feed to the Roman army. That was the general, that's how this particular area was getting their income, was raising pork for the Roman army. So, that's the background, that's the setting. In verse 2, when Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an impure spirit came from the tombs to meet him. This man lived in the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain. For he had often been chained hand and foot, but he tore the chains apart and broke the irons on his feet. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and in the hills he would cry out and cut himself with stones. This man's plight was really kind of dark, desperate, and now that we're moving into October, towards Halloween, it was scary. This guy had a messed up world. This is the kind of thing where the legends of werewolves and monsters would have come from. Would be people being demon possessed. This is like the stuff of, the movies that you see on TV. I was thinking about this just now reading that thing. It's kind of like the Hulk. This demon would come upon him, and suddenly he became the Hulk and could tear the chains and rip them off. That's pretty amazing, but I never actually personally witnessed this. I got it from a first-hand account of someone who had witnessed it. But I was told about 6 grown men trying to hold down a little 6-year-old child that was demon-possessed so that the pastor could pray, lay hands on the little girl and pray for her and cast the demon out. And 6 grown men could not hold one little girl down. So the idea of, this being reality, from what I have heard, is actually very true. So this guy's in about as bad a shape as you can get. Verse 6, when he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees in front of him. He shouted at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In God's name, don't torture me." For Jesus had said to him, "Come out of this man, you impure spirit." So, that particular verse is kind of jumbled around. Let me give you the progression of what actually took place. The guy came and fell on his knees. He saw Jesus from a distance. He came and he fell on his knees. Jesus said, "Come out of this man, you impure spirit." Then the guy shouts at the top of his lungs, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In God's name, don't torture me." So the guy sees Jesus. He runs up and he falls on his knees. And I looked at that and I thought, man, why would a demon-possessed man see Jesus? People were afraid to even pass by that area. Why would he see Jesus and go running up and fall down on his knees? And I realized that at this moment, when the guy first sees Jesus, he's probably heard about Jesus and knows about Jesus. And he sees that one brief moment, the song that we sang about earlier, "I'm Free." He saw that one brief chance and he thought, it's the Messiah. This is the guy that casts out demons. This is the guy that heals people that are broken and sick and diseased and dying. And he sees him and he runs up and he falls down to his knees. But Jesus saw what was going on beyond that and saw the demons. But that's my speculation, is that he was in that moment, he was in his right mind, and he thought, this is my chance. Unfortunately, he was right. But I look at that, and the next thing is Jesus tells him, come out of him. And the evil spirits, I just really like this. They say, what do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In God's name, don't torture me. Who's in control of that situation? Jesus is absolutely in control of that situation. When we become Christians, Paul says it like this. He said, I live, but no longer I, but Christ lives in me. And the life I live by faith in the Son of God. God actually comes and takes up residence and dwelling in us when we become Christians. And here's what that means. That means you should never, ever be afraid of anything spiritual. If you see someone demon-possessed, that should not scare you. I told you the story last week about, I used you last week, James, and the Lord told me this lady's demon-possessed, and she turned around and went like this and was like staring at me with big silver dollar eyes. That girl later said the last thing that she remembered was seeing me and being scared to death of me. And I thought, you know, and I'm taking a part that I was going to say later, but if you took a Christian and put him in horror movies, like a real born-again Christian, you took him and you dropped him in the middle of horror movies, the movie would be over by the next scene. Really would. Take me and drop me in with the spiritual, this, that, and the other. It's over. Because greater is he that is in me than he that's in the world. So when this impure spirit comes up and falls, and you know, his only hope is, Jesus, please don't torture me before the time. So we should never fear, ever fear spiritual presence, beings. I mean, I hear the kids tell their ghost stories and all that. Blah. You put a born-again Christian and it's over. It's done. Verse 9. Then Jesus asked him, what is your name? My name is Legion, he replied, for we are many. I just want you to note something here. More than one demon can possess a person. And there's a lot of teaching in here today, so there's some theological notes I'm going to be throwing out. Luke 11:24 says, when an impure spirit comes out of a person, this is Jesus talking, it goes through arid places seeking rest and does not find it. Then it says, I will return to the house I left. When it arrives, it finds the house swept clean and put in order. Then it goes and takes 7 other spirits more wicked than itself, and they go in and live there, and the final condition of that person is worse than the first. So, if someone is demon-possessed, and you go in and you cast the spirit out of that person, and then they don't fill up that spirit, that life, with Jesus, and just leave a void there, according to Jesus, the demon runs off, gets a few of his buddies, and comes back. And they're worse off in the end than they were when they were possessed by the demon earlier. It would have been better for that demon never to have been cast out the first time. That's a pretty scary thought. Okay, just wanted to get that theological point in there. Okay, verse 10. And he begged Jesus again not to send them out of the area. And Luke 8:31 gives a little illumination to that when it says out of the area. In Luke 8:31 it says, don't send us to the abyss or to the underworld. In other words, don't send us to hell before our time. There's an appointed time that apparently they have an understanding of, that one day they are going to pay in hell for what they've done. But the time has not yet come. And so they're saying, don't send us before our time. Don't torture us before our time. Okay, verse 11. A large herd of pigs was feeding on a nearby hillside. The demons begged Jesus, send us among the pigs. Allow us to go into them. He gave them permission, and the impure spirits came out and went into the pigs. The herd of about 2,000 in number rushed down the steep bank into the lake and were drowned. As a one-time farmer, that almost hurts me. 2,000 pigs. That is $500,000 in a very impoverished society. That's $500,000 of pork running off the side of a cliff and killing itself. And I thought about that and I thought, why did he do that? You got to forgive me. Sometimes I read scripture and, the first 50 times I've read it, I never ask questions like that. But when I go and I get ready to preach it, I'm like, well, why? Because God generally has reasoning behind what he's doing. And I looked at that and I thought, why on earth would you waste $500,000? I mean, these people, it might have cost some of them their houses to have those little pigs, this little piggy with it, to have little, whatever his name is, or little piggy up there riding down the thing going off the cliff. Why did he let that happen? Why did he do that? Why did he allow them what they wanted on top of it? Because what they did is they basically ran the pigs down in there, and then they were probably free to go, possess someone else or something else. And I'm like, why? Why did he do that? But it went back to the fact that I started thinking about this, and I thought, well, why would he do that? Well, I want to give you some of my thoughts. And this is just my thoughts, okay? This is not God speaking. This is me going, First off, they're in the middle of Israel, right? Raising pigs that God said you weren't supposed to eat in the Old Testament. That was forbidden food in the Old Testament. So they're in the middle of Israel raising swine, which was kind of an abomination to God. Fortunately, that didn't carry over the New Testament, those of you who like bacon as much as I do. But in this particular instance, this was still an abomination to God. And they were raising them to feed the Roman army. And the Roman army was, they were brutal. They were killing God's children. I don't know if you remember the story of when Jesus was born. You should. God told Joseph to take Mary and go down to Egypt. And Herod came behind that looking for Jesus, couldn't find him, and killed all of the 2-year-old and under children. Imagine that, moms. These were brutal, vicious people. And not only was it pork being raised in the Holy Land that God had promised to his people, but it was being raised for these brutal taskmasters that were hurting and killing his kids. I don't think God was happy that they were there. And some people surmise, well, maybe it was just because they asked to be cast out and put into the pigs. But whatever the case, God in his sovereignty determined that it was the right thing to do, so he allowed the demons to leave this guy, these many demons, and go in these pigs, and 2,000 of them rushed down the hill and off the cliff, and there goes $500,000. So, verse 14, those tending the pigs ran off and reported this to the town. in the town and countryside, and the people went out to see what had happened. I mean, can you imagine $500,000 of pigs just run off basically your whole livelihood just runs off and kills itself. And everyone's like, what on earth is going on? So out they come, verse 15. They came to Jesus, they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons sitting there, dressed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. Those who had seen it told the people what had happened to the demon-possessed. Let me read that. Those who had seen it told the people what had happened to the demon-possessed man, and told about the pigs as well. Then the people began to plead with Jesus to leave their region. So Jesus heals this monster and frees him from the bondage. And the guy is sitting there beside Jesus, and he's in his right mind, and he's dressed. And they freak out and begin to ask Jesus to leave. With a miracle standing there, staring them right in the face, they want him to leave. And I was thinking, why? Why do they want him to leave? A lot of folks just related to the cost of the pigs. But I think that the fear was a little deeper and a little broader than just the loss of the pigs. Because again, they were raising the pigs, which was a sin to the Jewish law. They were in the Jewish promised land doing it. They were raising them to feed the Romans who were oppressing the Jews. And this was Jesus standing there, a Jewish prophet who could do more with just a word in setting the man free than they could do with all of their human effort combined. They couldn't even bind the guy, and Jesus could completely set him free. Lock, stock, and barrel. And the bottom line, they had never seen power like that. They saw power that was beyond their comprehension. But the other side is suddenly they realized, wow, with where we're standing with God, that power could be turned against me instead of necessarily for me. So they got scared. And when they realized they're standing with God, and they realized that this was a man of God and a God prophet, they wanted him to leave. And I thought about that, and I thought, how does that relate to us? Have you ever known anybody who had a God encounter in their lives? Like something that took place in their life where they really, really knew, wow, God's real. God exists. And then instead of running to him, they turned around and ran away from him. It happens a lot, doesn't it? I mean, this isn't just about, people that are scared for rational reasons. I think I know a lot of people who've experienced God and then ran away. And there's nothing rational about running away from grace. There's nothing rational about running away from a God who cares for you, loves you, and wants nothing but the best and blessing for you in your life. I was looking for an example, and I realized my brother is a great example. The man knows. He knows that God is real. But he won't talk about it. He runs at every chance he gets. You bring it up and he's out of the room. And I thought, man, that's rough. And then I go to the other side, and I know that we pretty much all know people like that. And I love my brother. I want him to come to Christ before he breathes his last breath. And I'm sure you have some loved ones, because it's oftentimes loved ones that are in these situations. And that's how we know them well enough to know that they know that God's real and they are running from Him. What can we do? So I thought about that and thought, if I'm going to bring up this and I'm going to bring up examples, what do we do about that? Because if you go after them, I think we're kind of breaking from what Jesus did. Because Jesus, and we're going to get to this in just a second, He doesn't go after him. He says, okay, you want me to leave? All right, I'm gone. So what can we do for him if we're not going after him? Well, the Bible says we can pray. And we're supposed to love him. Pray and love him. But here's why. It's God's work. See, so many times we see stuff like that and we're like, ooh, man, you want to just grab him and shake him. You know that God's real. Come on. But the simple reality is, and hopefully none of us have tried that, it drives them further away from God. But it has to be God that draws them in the first place, doesn't it? I mean, is there anything that you can say that makes the cross make sense to people? There's really not a lot that we can say, but God can make sense of it in a way, as He's done for us, that you can't get around the grace and the mercy of God. Okay, so we pray for them and we love them. God has to do the work. Verse 18, as Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. Verse 19, Jesus did not let him, but said, go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how He has had mercy on you. So the man went away and began to tell in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and all the people were amazed. Again, I read things when I'm just reading and I just read right over it. And I go back and I'm going to preach on it. I'm like, what? The guy's begging Jesus, Jesus, please, please let me go with you. He's like, no. Nope. Can't come. Sorry. Keep your distance. And that just did not make sense to me until I started thinking about it. And I actually got in and read some commentaries and other things on this. But apparently that guy was probably amongst the Gentiles there that was raising the pigs. And he wasn't a Jew. And Jesus had made it very clear in other places. I think I was reading in Matthew 15 today, 14 or 15, that Jesus is dealing with this one lady. And he says, I've not been sent to the Gentiles. I am sent to the house of Israel. That's my calling. That's what I'm here to do at this point in time. Because essentially Jesus was saying, I'm not sent to the Jews. I am God's last-ditch effort to bring the Jews to God under the law. And I realized that this week when I was reading earlier in Matthew. I read Matthew chapter 5, the start of the Sermon on the Mount. If you ever get a chance to read Matthew chapter 5, all at once, just sit down and read it in like one of those easy reading versions. I would advise the NLT. That's what I was reading in this week. It was for the first time I'm sitting there and I'm reading it. And this is funny. Again, I've read these things over and over and over again. But sometimes God just lays them bare for you. And I'm reading there in Matthew chapter 5, and it is astounding what Jesus does. He says, the law says this, but I tell you this. And he says, here's the law. He says, I'm telling you, your righteousness really has to be here. And then he ends the whole thing with this crescendo in Matthew 5:48. Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect. And what he was doing is those people relied on their own righteousness to stand in good standing with God. And he was finally stripping that away so that he could make way for grace. And if any of you ever are starting to think, hey, I'm a good guy, my works are getting me somewhere in this world and in this life, or if you know someone that that's their issue and that's their problem, Matthew chapter 5. Just let them read Matthew chapter 5 in a real understandable version. And God just Jesus totally rips it away. We cannot please God in our own efforts. So, how did I get on that one? He was a Jew, not a Gentile. Okay, Jesus was there to, as a last-ditch effort by God to bring the Jews to God under the law, before grace was extended to everyone. And so, this guy was probably a Gentile. Another reason that Jesus might have left the guy behind was that the folks in the region wanted Jesus out of there. They rejected. They were saying, leave. We don't want you here. We're not going to listen to what you have to say, etc. We want you out of here. And I wonder if Jesus didn't leave this guy behind as a message that they could not escape. The Bible says the light dawned. You know, Jesus was maybe leaving this guy behind to say, the Son of God has been there trying to get around this. There's just this one guy. I mean, and the region of the Decapolis was big. It really was. Jesus told him just to go home and talk to, whomever, but the region of the Decapolis was big. He basically put this guy in the middle, and this guy was famous for being a maniac, essentially, or a demoniac, as it were. And Jesus put him right in the middle of that region with something that they could not get around. And by the way, just so you know, people can argue with your theology forever and ever and ever until they're blue in the face or whatever, but they cannot argue change in your life. If God comes in and does something in your life, people can't argue with that. That's a reality that they can't get around. We're going to talk about that in just a second. This is a sidebar. Because Jesus doesn't tell this guy to go and share with everybody a theological dissertation on exorcism. He doesn't go, and he doesn't ask him to go and study Scripture and then come out and provide this awesome sermon for everybody so that they can know how to live their lives. Jesus tells this guy very simply. He said, go back home and tell folks what God did and how he was merciful to you. What God did and how he was merciful to you. Can I tell you that anyone can share their faith? What God did, how he was merciful to you. And I know that anyone can share their faith because 2 of my kids have led kids to Christ standing in the elementary school bus lines waiting to come home. Tell what God did for you and how he's been merciful to you. It is not complicated. And some of you would say, but what if they ask questions? I don't know. No, that's my answer. It's my favorite answer. I don't know. If they ask me a question, I don't know. If they're really persistent about it, here's the thing, I don't know that question, well, what about the little starving kids in pseudo-Africa, the moon? I don't know. But I know what he did for me. And I can tell you how he has been merciful and good to me. And again, that's something that you just can't get around. And it's completely simple. God really does keep the bar low on us sometimes. Did you know that? We try to make the bar really high in our own minds and in our own lives. We try to concoct this whole thing. God really keeps it pretty manageable for us most of the time. I know what he did for me. If they're sincere, by the way, and they insist on an answer, you can always ask the pastor, or you can ask your folks in your Connect group. They generally have some, generally got a good reference there somewhere. So, what do we learn from this story? First, evil spirits are not fun. Okay? You don't want to mess with them. They will kick you to the curb quicker than you can blink. Unless, of course, you're born again, at which case they got no shot. And they're generally trying to run Second, and this applies to it, Jesus has dominion and control over the forces of darkness in this world. And we do not need to be afraid ever of demons and evil spirits. As Christians, you do not need to fear them or it or whatever you call or think. 3, if people rejected Jesus himself with the miracle sitting right in front of them, sometimes they're going to reject you too. That's just a part of life. But his response to it was, okay. He didn't get upset with anybody. He didn't call down fire. He didn't yell at him. He said, okay. And he moved on to the next town. He honored their request. He actually was very gracious, and he honored their request. And we should be doing the same thing. In fact, Matthew 7:6. I missed this when we went through Matthew chapter 7, so I'm going to cover this right now. It says, do not give dogs what is sacred. Do not throw your pearls to pigs. If you do, they may trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces. And the point is, some people are going to reject the message of Christ. Don't fight with them. Don't keep throwing your pearls at them. If they reject, just let it go. Just keep moving and keep telling your story. Finally, this man is a good illustration for us. Because God has done an incredible miracle in each of our lives. He set us free. The same way he broke the bondage that this man was in, he's broken a bondage in all of us of sin and a cycle of hurt and pain. And we've been set free from sin. And just like this guy, Jesus didn't take us home to heaven as soon as we said, yes, Lord, I will follow you. Wouldn't that have been the easiest way? Yes, Lord, come into my life. Poof, off you go to heaven. Woo! But he didn't do that with us. And he didn't do that with this guy. Instead, he gave him a task to do, and he gives us a task to do. He left him behind to tell others of God's mercy and what God did for him. And that's what he's done with us. Our job is to tell people what God has done for us. It's not a complicated job. You don't have to be an orator. You don't even have to be an extrovert. Because it comes up. Generally, just simply living life. At some point, what God does for you will come up. Our task is to tell what God did and His great mercy. So, to conclude, stay clear of evil. It's not good. It will destroy your life. Remember that Jesus is Lord of everything in every situation. Last week, He's Lord over the storm and the seas. This week, it's demons. He is simply Lord of all. There's no fear and no worries. We simply take it to Him. He is the Lord, and He is God. And finally, tell people what God has done for you. The bottom line is simply this. We have the greatest news in the whole world. We really should be sharing it.